Hey everybody, welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm Michael Noland. Last night, Thursday evening, Paul McCartney and his producer, Andrew Watt, gathered together with 30 very lucky Paul McCartney fans and previewed his upcoming album. Not only that, but the man talked about each and every song, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. All right, so first of all, last night's preview of Paul McCartney's brand new upcoming album called The Boys of Dungeon Lane went very, very well. The audience's reaction as they heard this album was very positive. And I've got to say, the article regarding the album is positive as well. I'm talking about an article that I picked up in Billboard where they covered the evening, and the article goes on to say, overall, the album, which comes out May 29th on Capitol Records, is delightfully Beatlesque in parts in terms of melodies, instrumentation, bold tempo, and stylistic changes, and of course McCartney's vocals, which sound by turns sturdy and robust, and then delicate and vulnerable. Now, we've already talked about how delicate and vulnerable Paul's voice is on The Days We Left Behind. It works for that song, but they're also saying that his voice on other tracks is sturdy. No, not just sturdy, but robust. Now, Andrew Watt stressed that for the most part, other than strings and orchestration, which we all know Paul will have a whole lot to do with what goes on by them as well, McCartney played all the instruments on the album, including drums, though he got a very able assist from Ringo Starr on one track. Andrew then concluded his statement by saying no one else can do that. Watt said of McCartney's multi-instrumental prowess. A modest McCartney then replied, well, a few people can do it, but not many. Now, these fans were shuttled from Capitol Records Tower to Andrew Watt's studio, and they weren't even promised that Paul McCartney would be there, but before the evening was over, him, his wife, and Andrew, and a group of 30 very lucky and fortunate fans got to preview the album. Of course, the article goes on to say that when him and Andrew first got together for a cup of tea, that his manager suggested that things just clicked. He also states in this article that Andrew can be very difficult to work with, and of course, any Paul McCartney fan knows that, well, Paul can also be difficult to work with. It sounds like two men who want to have their way, and somehow they've put together something that is greater than perhaps the both of them individually. And we already know that each one of these guys individually have created some very great music. Now, the article goes on to say how Paul McCartney and Andrew Watt met. It was at the suggestion of Paul McCartney's manager, no doubt with all of the highlights from Andrew Watt's recent victories with many different artists, and they just seemed to click. Now, Paul did say he's a bit pushy, and he is, but that's what you want in a producer. You don't want a shrinking violet. Now, in the past, there have been those who have said that's exactly what Paul McCartney wants in the studio, taking whatever genius he can get from a producer, but still having his own way. But in this case, he's saying that perhaps both of them had their own way in how they produced this album. Now, like I said, Paul discussed each and every track. Here's what he had to say about every single track off of The Boys of Dungeon Lane. The first track, As You Lie There. The song that came from the first tea meeting was inspired by McCartney's childhood in Liverpool and a neighborhood girl that I really fancied named Jasmine. The tune starts as a spoken word track before going into a sweet, then rocking melody that changes tempo and shifts throughout. Sounds very interesting. The lyrics, do I ever cross your mind as you lie there? As you lie across the bed, am I there inside your head? So once again, we see Paul McCartney going down memory lane, if not exactly dungeon lane. Now, the next track, Lost Horizon, it says here, the late Eddie Klein, who worked with the Beatles at Abbey Road and then with McCartney at his studio in Sussex, England, found the track that McCartney said he didn't remember writing or recording. But of that song, he says, we produced it exactly like the cassette. And then he brought it to Los Angeles to add guitar parts. The chugging and mid-tempo track is a nostalgic look back. Once again, we see a theme happening with this album, don't we? The main theme of Lost Horizon is not something lost, but it is you gotta live for now. Now, I'm not gonna cover Days We Left Behind. I've already done videos on that, what I feel about it and everything. But basically, he says, it's my memories of Liverpool. Dungeon Lane was near where I lived, me and George Harrison. Now, I already had guesstimated that some of these lyrics were aimed at George, and it's good to see that some of the lyrics right on this song are aimed specifically at George Harrison before Paul McCartney ever met John Lennon. That gets us to Ripples in a Pond, a very upbeat song with McCartney's vocals pushed front and center with a bouncy pop production before delving into a spicy, inventive bridge, not sure what they're talking about there, written for and about his wife. McCartney changed the song from a third-person song like she, turning it into a second-person, you, to make it more personal to Nancy, his wife. One of the lyrics from that song, I love you more than I ever did before. So here we see that the album also is making room for where Paul McCartney is at now, just like we brought up before. It's not just a trip down memory lane, it's how his memories are helping him survive to this very day. Now, this next song, Mountaintop, you know, the title didn't do much for me as I read it off before on my previous video, but I gotta tell you, this is the one that really has me interested. Produced with tape loops, the spacey song is from the perspective of a young girl tripping out with her friends at a music festival. Goes on to say McCartney's voice is almost unrecognizable in the dreamy song that sounds like a cousin to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And the lyrics? Everybody's flippin', need to get a grip and get away, or do you want to stay? Goes on to say that the tune, which burst into psychedelic warp speed at one point with pounding guitars and drums, would sound even more experimental if it weren't created by the person who, with his friends 70 years ago, completely invented a new language in rock and roll. So here we're seeing the album isn't just little acoustic ditties. Okay, there's going to be some rockers here and evidently some psychedelia to boot. Now, George Harrison is the subject on the next song, even though Paul McCartney says Down South was dedicated to memories of him with John and George, but listen to what they have to say about this cut. Perhaps the most nostalgic song on the album prompted a revealing story about how McCartney used to hitchhike with both Harrison and John Lennon, often by grabbing a ride with a lorry or a truck driver and heading to Wales or southern England. But he specifically recalls how he and Harrison once were in Wales and hopped a ride in a milk truck. Harrison's zipper was in the back of his pants, got connected to the battery, and he got zapped. That sounds like a busy tune, and what you would probably guess at this point is a slight laying off in energy, and evidently we get exactly that. The song, We Too. The album contains many inventive twists and turns, but perhaps none more endearing than the creation of this stripped down tune. As McCartney explained, when EMI got purchased by Thorn Electric in 1979, the buyer wanted to purge all of Abbey Road's equipment. Paul got a lot of that equipment himself. One of those pieces of equipment was a Studer 4-track, and he talks about bouncing down, all right? And this was an old trick back in the days to make more room. If you only had 4 tracks and you had Ringo on track 1 and Paul McCartney's bass on track 2, Paul said what they would often do is combine those 2 tracks, bounce them to another track, and then you would lose those 2 tracks because you would then have to re-record over those individual tracks. So once again, a song steeped in memory, and Paul says we're exceptionally proud of the snare drum on this particular track. Now they say that the next cut, Come Inside, one of the album's pure rock tunes, had the audience clapping along with McCartney, giving little explanation. Basically, Paul says, it's basically a rocker. Not a lot I can say about it. Just play it, he said to Andrew, and the audience loved it. Now, Paul kind of comes forward in his memory, still ancient by today's date, but with the song Never Know. He says, I was out in California. I've always loved that Laurel Canyon vibe of the 70s. I was playing the guitar, trying to get the vibe. This is me trying to do that. McCartney said of the dense, heavy tune that then veers into a clarinet and then turns heavy again, with McCartney sounding a little like Lennon vocally. We've heard him doing that in the past, haven't we? Now, the next track, Home to Us, is the track that Ringo is the drummer, okay? The one time that there's another musician on this album, and not only does he play drums on Home to Us, but he also does a duet with Paul McCartney. Now, Ringo at first thought that they just wanted him to lay down a basic track, but they wanted much more from him. And when McCartney sent him the song and told him to sing it, Ringo thought he was just going to be singing on the chorus. This is the first time Ringo's ever done a duet with another Beatle. Now, the song Life Can Be Hard came from his COVID period. Makes you wonder why it wasn't on the McCartney 3 album, but evidently this was one of the fan favorites of the evening as well. There's a whole story behind that song, and of course he now talks about the song Star. Now, I thought this was called The First Star of the Evening or something like that, as I recall, but they're listing it as just being called Star. McCartney was touring in Costa Rica and had a day off, which he planned to spend lathered up in sunscreen poolside, but it was pouring rain, so McCartney decided to write a song instead and came up with Star, another uplifting song. The first star of the night is always special when you see it, he said. It always gives me a little hope. The sweet melodic acoustic tune stresses, I know my little world is still all right. So we can see McCartney focusing on his present every once in a while on this album and then reflecting back to the past, as he does on the next song as well, Salesman Saint, a song that's dedicated to his father, although it's not specifically about his father, but it's more of a collective type of father that existed in England at the time when Paul was still a very young boy. So how does he choose to end this album that is a reflection of his childhood memories? He comes right back to the present time. All right, Mama Gets By, evidently, is a lush, dramatic piano ballad that expands with strings and orchestra. And he says sometimes writing is all based on memory, as he has said several times in recent interviews, right? But he says this is not that. He compares this to Lady Madonna. Some of the opening lines on that is Mama gets by while Papa gets high. You gotta wonder what this song is all about. And the main character of this song is the young son of Mama and Papa. All right, folks, that about covers it as far as what to expect on this album. I gotta tell you, I'm excited. If Paul does this right, this could be the masterpiece that we're all hoping and praying that he can put together one more time. But I want to hear from you. What do you guys think? Are you excited about this album? Is it good news that there's some Beatlesque kind of music here? Is it good news to you that Paul is playing, with the exception of one drum part on one song, every single instrument on this album other than orchestra? And as I've said before, Paul will have a lot of input. Even if he has to just hum the violin parts, he will have a say in that as well. And finally, 14 full tracks. It sounds like this is going to be a wonderful album if everything that I've read in this article is true. How about you? What do you think? Does Paul have it in him to give us one more freaking Band on the Run, or Venus and Mars, or for that matter, McCartney or Ram album? One more, Paul. That's all we're asking for. All right, that's the video for tonight, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. That helps with views for the video. People get gravitated toward the channel grows. It's good for all, and I appreciate it when you do that. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel as of yet, that's easy. We call it the tribe around here. And so all you have to do is hit that subscribe to the tribe button, then tap that top bell icon if you would. It's one additional step, but it's kind of important. That way you are absolutely notified of all my upcoming videos and or live streams. All right, I'm Michael Noland. This is The Bottom Line. We are the tribe.